Can you hear me now? So you can hear me, right? How are you? I missed you. Okay. Is it, it's not too echoey or anything, is it? Because
Maureen, are we ready to start? Hello, everybody. We are ready to start our meeting, and let me take this opportunity to welcome all participants today. I can't see you, but I know you're listening, and we are ready to listen to the presentation. And all the Sacco managers, please feel welcome. Accosca staff, feel very, very welcome. Colleagues from all over Africa, please feel very, very, very welcome. And colleagues outside Africa also feel welcome. I also want in a special way to welcome our guest speaker today. Hi, Kate. I hope, Kate, you are right.
Yeah, we're good.
Welcome to the presentation as well. And everybody is ready to listen to you. And as you know, this is a very, very important topic that we all need to discuss. And concerning the staff, recruitment of staff, how best can we have staff, how best can we recruit people that can deliver in our organizations? Very, very important topic to discuss, and that's why I want to welcome you, Kate, for this on this presentation. First of all, before we get deep into the presentation, housekeeping rules. Please note that currently I'm the only one that you can listen to. Everybody has been muted to ensure that there's clarity throughout the session. So that is the first rule. And this webinar is recorded and will be shared via our websites, and our website, that is Accosca website. We encourage all participants to communicate throughout the presentation using the question section provided on your screen. If you look at your right side, you can send your question to the space provided just below chat, where you can post your question or any comment you want to make as the presentation is being taken. For those using mobile phones, click on the question mark icon on your screen, and then you can type your comment or your queries or whatever question you want to put across. Our presenter will be able to take it. And if you also want, you can email us through the Accosca email, info@accosca.org. You can send all what you want us to discuss or what you want to share, because I know this is a very, very broad topic. People might want to contribute. So but those are the housekeeping rules for today as we go through the presentation. Next, Maureen. Maureen, can we go next? Okay. Now let me introduce the presenter formally. The presenter, the name is Katy Zaleski. Katy Zaleski is Vice President of Human Resources, currently overseeing the Human Resource and Training Department. And she's an active member of the community, serving as a board member for Marshfield area, United Way, and part of the Talent Development Committee through the Portage Country Business Council. She's also involved in international credit union development work in Africa through the African Confederation of Cooperative Savings and Credit Association and Foundation. And Katy and her husband, Pat, they have 2 boys. They enjoy spending time outside sports and traveling. I can attest to that because Katy has been coming to Africa several times, and we've been together in the AD programs. And once again, let me welcome you, Katy, to this presentation. So may I invite everybody now to join me in welcoming Katy. I know people cannot see you, but at least you can see me as I clap for you as you want to take the presentation. Welcome, Katy.
Thank you. Thanks, Rubani. I appreciate that introduction. I just want to say good morning and welcome from Central Wisconsin. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning here, so I'm starting my day as you guys are kind of finishing your day. So I've been up early and excited about this all day long. So just really honored and proud to be here with all of you to talk about a topic that I am extremely excited and passionate about. As Rubani said, I'm the VP of Human Resources at Simplicity Credit Union here in Wisconsin. And you know, to me, recruiting and retention, as you can see from this slide, is all about building a dream team at your Sacco. So that's kind of where we're going to go from here and talk through recruiting and retention practices that you can take home and implement right away. So Maureen, if you want to go to that next slide for me. As I said, we're going to talk through recruitment best practices. We're going to talk about retention efforts and how those 2 things go hand in hand to build that dream team. To me, recruitment and retention are a big part of what I think is the most important thing about HR and an organization. So to me, my big passion is professional development as well as organizational culture, and recruitment and retention are critical initiatives in accomplishing both of those things. So you'll see we'll talk through those 2, and then we're going to go to why is it so important. So why is having strategic initiatives around recruitment and retention and approaching those initiatives so important to the growth of your Sacco? Because at the end of the day, that's, you know, serving our members, people helping people, and the growth of our Sacco is the most important. And so your initiative should bring value to the organization, and recruitment and retention does just that. And then you'll see at the end, for many of you, you've attended a number of different sessions, but really just bringing it full circle. So how does recruitment and retention help with the liquidity of your Sacco? How does recruitment and retention help with financial counseling and member experience? And how do those all draw together? So we'll talk about that at the end. So with that, I just wanted to talk a little bit from a perspective so you can get an idea from where I come from on an HR side. Our HR team a little over a year ago sat down and went through an entire session where we, as a department, HR and training, set forth our career or our passion, our mission, our promise to our members. So when I talk about members from an HR perspective, I talk about our employees. So to me, at the end of the day, same as our frontline staff, the employees that we're serving are our members and our coworkers. And so we developed a mission statement as a team. And I think that this mission statement really gives an idea of where we want to go, and it will really explain why recruiting and retention are so critical. So I'm going to just read this. It says, as an employer of choice, we challenge the status quo, invest in our people, lead with innovation, and foster a trustworthy and safe organizational culture. So that is the mission of my team, and that's the mission that we bring to Simplicity Credit Union. So with that, I'm going to have Maureen, you move ahead to one more slide. One thing, back one slide, sorry. One thing you guys will know that I absolutely love quotes. And so I have a quote that says, if you hire people just because they do a job, they'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they'll work for you with blood, sweat, and tears. And that's Simon Sinek. So the reason I share this, and I think it's so critical for us to think about that as a credit union or as a Sacco, our mission is people helping people. And if we carry that mission through, not just in the way that we service our members, our external members, but we carry through that people helping people in our recruiting and retention efforts, you're going to draw in the type of employees that are going to live out that mission of people helping people. And I think that this quote really says that. So on the next slide, we're going to go through that recruitment process. And there's a number of different steps in this. Maureen, I'll have you move ahead one slide. In the recruitment process, I broke this down into a couple of different steps. Bonnie and I had a really great conversation prior to this meeting so that I could help or I could understand kind of what does recruiting and retention look like in Africa. And very similar, there's very similar underlying common threads both in Africa as in here in the US. But there are some things that I think are best practices that that we can talk through and work through and potentially be implemented in your HR practices. So the first part is going through recruitment and best practices. And then I'll go through job descriptions and that recruitment strategy. So all of these pieces will build on each other. And you'll see how they all connect to have an entire seamless recruitment process from the point of a vacancy in a position all the way to the time that you bring someone on board. So you'll see those first three, recruitment best practices, job descriptions and recruitment salary, and job postings and advertisement. All three of those are administrative prior to even bringing on a new or posting a job. So it's really important that your practices are very streamlined and again, strategic so that you can recruit and bring on top talent. Then obviously we'll talk about the interviewing process. What does that interview process look like? And then once you find your perfect candidate, what are you doing from an offer and compensation standpoint to bring that candidate on? So we're gonna break this conversation down in this webinar into recruitment and retention. I'll talk about similar things in both areas, but right now we're just gonna focus on that recruitment process. So we're gonna move to the next slide on the recruitment best practices. We'll talk for a little bit on this. So when a new hire, from a best practice standpoint, when a new hire is needed, so either you create a new position or you're replacing a position for either someone left the organization or even better, someone got promoted into a different position at your Sacco, you're now in the position that you need to hire a new person. So what does that process look like? And my recommendation and the way that we do it is that we have, every time we have a replacement position, we use a requisition form. That requisition form has a number of different important pieces to it to help us make that business case and have that conversation as to why that position needs to be replaced or why that position needs to be added. So you'll see on that requisition form and in these bullet points, I have, is it a new or a replacement position? To me, that's a really critical piece because a replacement position is a little bit, in my mind, easier to make a business case as to replace that position. A new position, however, really needs to have a strong business case, and we'll get to that in just a second. Is it budgeted or not budgeted? So a lot of times that not budgeted happens when you're adding a new position. Something may come up, you might find a new position, you might restructure a department and recognize that a new position is needed. So we do have, if it's budgeted or not budgeted, on our requisition form, because if it's not budgeted, then it needs to have further conversations on whether or not it is a position that we can add within our current salary budget, or if it's a position outside of our current salary budget, we would need to go take that to our board of directors as an additional salary budget item. So those items are really important to highlight just because it impacts the process that we do. The next one that I want to talk a lot about, and Fubani and I had quite a long conversation about, is what does it look like when you are hiring a person? And I have hiring supervisor manager right on my form as who is the person that's hiring for that management or for that new replacement position. It's really important from an HR perspective for us to know who we're partnering with when we're recruiting. So I wanted to talk through that a little bit because this is one of those areas where I feel like there's a little bit of a difference between how we handle it here at Simplicity and in the US and how it's handled at many of the Saccos in Africa. When a position is my understanding is that when a position is being replaced, typically it's the board of directors who approves positions or replacement positions. My recommendation then would be that you take a step back and you have the manager that person will report to be the hiring manager. And at the end of the day, the approval of any new positions is on the CEO of the organization. So this requisition form that I'm referencing, and I will send a copy of it to Maureen so that anybody is on this call can get a copy of it to see what that form looks like. But once that form is completed, our CEO is the only one that signs the requisition form to hire a new position, because any other position in the organization, with the exception of the CEO, is an operational decision and on the CEO. So I do have examples under here. You can see if it's a teller position or a frontline position, the hiring manager and the individual that would be conducting the interviews would be the member services manager. Same thing with an accounting position. The finance manager would be a hiring manager or the one conducting the interview. The exception to that would be if you had the member services manager, your finance manager, anyone that would report to your CEO would be the one then conducting the interview. So best practice is the individual who will be supervising and overseeing the new hire or the position you're hiring in. That is the individual that will attend the interviews or conduct the interviews. There is exceptions when I was talking to Fubani, and it's where you can reach out and get some assistance from your apex bodies, particularly for some of those higher up management positions. But typically, you're going to want that supervisor or manager who will oversee that position conducting the interviews. Again, the exception to that is your board of directors will conduct your CEO's interviews and hire your CEOs, as your CEO is the only one that reports to your board of directors. So I thought that was really important because I think and many small credit unions in the US, and from my understanding in the Saccos in Africa, CEOs are a big part of the interview process. In my opinion, that the CEO is in charge of and responsible for the strategic growth of the credit union. And this again would be more of a day-to-day operations, especially for some of those entry-level teller positions, even lending positions. If you have a loan manager, that loan manager would conduct those. You know, if your CEOs or your board of directors are spending so much time on day-to-day operations, then they're not spending the time dedicated to those strategic initiatives and the growth of your credit union. So just think about when you're doing recruiting from this point forward, who is the person that new hire is going to report to, and that would be the individual. The next piece in my recruitment requisition form is business case. The business case is on the form to just, it's the argument why this position should be added. Not because it's necessarily just a replacement position, but in order to maintain member service, in order to provide that exceptional service that Angela talked about last week, this position is critical for us to be able to cover or provide that service to our members. If it's a loan position, it may be a business case to say that say it's a new position. This is a new loan position. We anticipate loan growth in this community as we expand into a community. We need to add a loan officer, and many times the loans that they do will more than pay for their salary. So those are the types of things that you want to add in a business case, really the why you need to add this position. Again, that's really important when you send this information to your CEO for them to make a good decision on approving this replacement position. So that's kind of the start. Anytime we need a new position, this form is filled out, usually a combination between either the hiring manager or HR, and then we move that forward, putting that form together, that business case together with that hiring manager, and then submitting that to the CEO for approval and his or her signature. And then we can move forward with posting the job or into the next step. So that next step is on the next slide. So Maureen, I'll have you move to that next slide. One of the other pieces that I didn't have on the requisition form slide, but I have on this slide is that anytime we have a new position or we do a replacement position, we take that as an opportunity to revamp and review our job descriptions to make sure that the pieces of those job descriptions still align with what that individual would actually be doing in their job. But part of that conversation is our recruitment strategy. So just like I said, I will send out that requisition form document. I also included this recruitment strategy document that we use from an HR perspective when working with the hiring manager. Now, if it's a really small Sacco and your hiring manager you may not have an HR department to work on it, these are great questions that just your hiring manager can read over and review. And things on this form, so I'm just going to glance because I wanted to share a couple of them. Top 3 functions of this position. So if you're replacing a teller position, what are the top 3 functions of that position? And what are the characteristics of a successful candidate? So if you go into your recruitment process very intentionally saying, here's the top 3 key functions, what are the characteristics of our most successful candidate? So think about maybe your top teller right now, and what are their top characteristics? One may be a great empathy, so they can really relate to your members. Maybe it's a great listener. Maybe it's accuracy, right? For a teller, accuracy is extremely important. So, you know, when you're thinking through your best employees in that current position, what are those characteristics? because you want to know what those characteristics are, so you're looking very specifically for them in your recruitment. So the other thing to think about, and COVID has really highlighted this, not just for us, but I'm sure for every Sacco in Africa, what does it look like to be able to service members remotely or utilizing maybe digital channels? With everything closed down, members may not be able to come into your Sacco. They may not be able to come into our credit union. So what does that look like? How has that changed our focus on products and services? And that same focus should be applied then towards our internal members. What positions at our organization could we potentially allow our employees to telecommute or work from home, and actually expand maybe the area in which you can recruit in? You might be able to allow a flexible schedule and recruit some really top talent who have some other restrictions, whether they live in a different area, maybe a spouse works different hours, so there's restrictions on time that they can work. But if it's a job that has flexible hours, for example, one that we're talking about at Simplicity is, can they be flexible in loan processing or underwriting, those types of things that can be done with flexible hours. If those types of conversations are happening up front in your recruitment strategy conversation, then you can go into your job postings and have that in your postings and potentially recruit a whole nother level of or caliber of applicant that may otherwise not be able to apply for your positions. So like I said, recruitment strategy is extremely important. And those are all things that we talk about in that recruitment strategy discussion with the hiring manager from an HR standpoint. Or if you are the hiring manager and you don't have HR, these are things that you can document yourself so that when you go into that interview process, you know exactly what you're looking for. The next really critical piece of that is your job description. So that recruitment strategy and those top 3 key functions that you talk about, and those top characteristics, you want to make sure that you're including those in your job description. So you can see how all of these conversations are really critical to move this process forward very intentionally. And when you look at a job description, and again, I will share one of our job descriptions so you can see what those look like. Because I think many times when you attend webinars, it's one thing to hear people talk about it. It's another to see physical examples. And again, I'm always welcome to share or collaborate with any of you. As we know, credit unions are, we cooperate among cooperatives. So when I talk through a summary of a position, what does that mean? It's a quick, brief summary of what that job is going to be. Those top 3 key functions are where you're going to see and plug into your essential functions of the job description. You'll probably have more than those 3 that you identified in your recruitment strategy, but it's critical to have those on the top of your recruitment strategy or of your essential functions of the job. Again, when we talked about competencies for a position, those are where the requirements come in. And what type of competencies does this position have? This is where you should be really thoughtful in what you put in for competencies, because you don't want to eliminate really incredible applicants by putting such a high competency. So for example, you know, for our frontline staff, our tellers, which we call MSRs here at Simplicity, I don't have requirement of a 4-year degree in that position. I would discourage some really incredible applicants by adding that in there. Now, on the flip side of that, if I'm talking about my accounting team, yes, I absolutely then will have an additional competency on there, whether it's an associate's, a 2-year, or a bachelor's in finance, a 4-year degree, depending on what that position is in the organization. We have some tiers in our accounting team, so some require a degree, some do not. So when looking at those competencies, be really diligent on what is the minimum needed to be able to successfully do that job, but not such a high competency that you start eliminating really incredible applicants who may not meet that 4-year degree. So you're excluding some really fantastic and potential employees. The next piece of it is professionalism and attitude. These are things that I added to our job descriptions because I think it's really important to set the bar in the job description based on expectations when it comes to our organizational culture and it comes to communication and respect among employees at our organization. So I talked about organizational culture being a big critical component to me of recruitment and retention, and something that I'm extremely passionate about. And so we'll get to this later as we talk through performance management and accountability. We'll get to that. But I put that in all of my job descriptions so that there is no confusion, there is no unknown expectation on what we expect as far as professionalism and attitude, and then leadership. So leadership, I have asterisks on those. Leadership is one that I don't have on all positions. It depends on which position in the organization it has that. So I don't add leadership components to our frontline teller job descriptions, but I absolutely add professionalism and attitude. And so when I share this out, you can see what bullet points I add in all of these job descriptions. Another job description essential function that I add, so I'm going to skip back because I think it's really critical. I have it on every single job description in our organization, does not matter which one, but it says reinforce continuous collaboration and respectful communication between all departments by promoting strong, positive, and productive working relationships through the commitment to the company's core values, vision, and mission statements. So I have that in every job description. Again, like I said before, it's really critical when you are focusing on your organizational culture to tie in your core values, your mission statements, and everything about your organization from start to finish. And so that's why we include those in our job descriptions. So I just think that those are really important things to start from the beginning, and it carries through all the way and is continued to be reinforced as employees. And when we have coaching conversations, when we have annual conversations about performance management or performance reviews, etc. So it's really important to start that conversation early and continue it on. Maureen, I'm going to have you go to the next slide. Okay, so on this slide, I did a lot of conversations with Fubani, and I've been messaging with Maureen, but I really wanted to just see if everybody wouldn't mind either going in the chat, or Maureen, I don't know, do we have a poll to just talk about where everybody currently is posting positions for your Sacco?
Just give me a minute, I get that ready. It's stuck.
Yep,
The
no,
internet.
perfect.
Ndio hata walikuwa wamesema kweli. Ni where do you post your jobs? Where do you post your jobs? Post your jobs. Lakini unajua si multiple choices.
Tutaweka iko kwa presentation.
Multiple questions.
Aika tu basi.
Nani huyo?
Nge type tu alafu tuweke.
some online newspaper, other. Explain. Cinderella.
Maureen, while you're getting that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different areas that Fubani and I talked about, and then we'll go back to it too. So the reason I'm really curious about this was in my conversation with Fubani, there were substantial differences in job searching for applicants here that we work with, and what Fubani was sharing in our conversation. The vast majority of our applicants utilize a platform called Indeed. My understanding is in South Africa, it's called Elite CV. In Kenya, there's one called Brighter Monday. So they would be similar online platforms where applicants can apply through. Also, Fubani and I talked a lot about the utilization of job centers. There we go, thank you. So if you guys want to just quickly take this poll, that way we can get, I want to just see kind of where the vast majority of individuals are currently utilizing, and just talk a little bit about those different aspects, and then potential opportunities for expansion as you develop your recruiting efforts. Maureen, are those coming in?
Yes, let me share the results.
Awesome, perfect. Okay. So 42% are utilizing online services. That's fantastic. Newspapers are 44%. So those two are really kind of equal. And then others are explained. So I don't know, Maureen, if anybody added some different areas that they're posting, would you mind sharing those?
I'm seeing 40%. I don't know where they shared that to. Let me just try and look at that.
Okay. I know Fubani talked also about, especially particularly in more rural areas, like posters or postings around town. I wonder if the other might be job centers. So I think that those might fill that other. So if you see anything other than job centers or posters around, say, a community, let me know. But I'm excited to see that 42% are doing it online. The other 44% with newspapers, then you're receiving resumes in branch. And so I just wanted to talk through this because from our perspective, from an HR perspective here, all of our recruitment and all of our applications come in online only. So even if we get a paper resume, we actually will reach out to that applicant and request that they fill out an application online on Indeed. I understand that that might bring in some restrictions. So when you're looking at how you're posting for jobs, if you're not getting the caliber of applicants that you're looking for, maybe consider utilizing a different method. So if you're solely using newspapers right now, say, for example, is there an online option that you can pursue? And if it's, and the online option that we use the free option. So I do not pay for my postings on Indeed. I have for very specific positions like our VP of IT recruitment, just because I wanted a little bit more awareness of it at the top. But you know, a lot of those online services that we utilize don't have a cost or have a minimal cost. So when you're posting a job, if you're not seeing the caliber of applicants that you're looking for, you're not getting very many applicants, I just really wanted to talk through the different areas at which you can use to be able to promote your positions at the Sacco. The other piece with it might be really good to reach out to your Apex body. I know Fubani said that they've worked with posting for Saccos in Malawi. I am sure any of the Apex bodies in your countries would also partner with you or would be a resource for you. And then the only other one that's not you posting and waiting is the proactively recruiting from other financials or other businesses. So one of the things that we do on a regular basis, we have HR business cards, and it's just an HR business card. It has a phone number for our HR department, and I hand that out to all of my staff at the organization. And if they are out at a store shopping, if they're out at a restaurant and have an exceptional server at the restaurant, they may hand out that card and say, you know, your customer service was incredible. I don't know if you've ever thought about working at Simplicity Credit Union. Check out our website, check out if we have any positions open. So one of the best ways is word of mouth of your own employees to recruit on new employees. So you can proactively do that. I've done it a number of times. I hand out my business cards regularly. Many times we have staff that have come from other financial institutions. So when I post a position, I'll reach out to that staff and say, is there anybody at your previous financial that you think would be a really good fit for this position? And we'll reach out to them professionally and see if they're interested in applying for the position. So I understand that that's absolutely something that happens there. It's something that happens everywhere. And I think if you're looking for a very difficult recruitment, that's a great way of handling it. Now, what I will say as a caveat of that is, if you are out recruiting from other places, there are a handful of Saccos, credit unions in my town. I typically do not recruit from those credit unions. I will not say that I haven't, but I typically do not try to recruit from other credit unions, although I don't discourage other credit union employees to apply for our positions for sure. But I will recruit from other financials and from other banks. The other piece of that is that I realize that other financials and other credit unions are going to do the same approach as I am when it comes to our staff. I think we have an incredible team. We have amazing staff. And so I know that our staff are constantly getting headhunted, constantly getting recruited. And then that's, to me, why it's so critical for us to have this conversation on retention, because retention efforts are what keeps staff with us. So I'm going to have you move on to the next position, or the next slide, Noreen. And so then I just wanted to get into the interviewing process, just making sure that your process, again, like I said, is very streamlined, and your interviewing process, your recruiting process isn't a barrier for good candidates. So again, continuing to question, you know, are the things that we're doing from an interview process, from a recruiting process, do we think that any of those might be a barrier for good applicants? Again, resume submission is contingent on how you post. So newsletter, they're going to mail them in, or newspaper, they're going to mail them in. Online, you're going to get them electronically. The candidate selection, again, this goes back to the job description. So when you're deciding who you want to bring in to interview, do it based on whether or not they meet those qualifications that you set prior to even posting the job with that recruitment strategy. And then remember to utilize standardized interview questions. So if you're interviewing for the same position, an accounting position, make sure that every question you ask to every candidate you interview is the same questions. For us, legally in the US, there's laws around discrimination, and And so it's critical that we use the same questions so it does not look like there's any type of discrimination that occurs when we're interviewing. But I think it's really the only way for you to get a fair assessment of all the individuals that you interview. I would talk about, I said mix, competency questions, behavioral questions, and high impact questions in your interviews. So, talk to me about a time when you and a colleague had a conflict. How did you resolve it? That's a question you want to know for everybody. How do they interact with their coworkers? But you also want to ask about accuracy if you're interviewing for a teller position. So making sure that you have a good mix of questions. I will tell you that there's the internet's a great resource. If you just go out and Google good behavioral interview questions, a ton of them will come up. So I do have a set of interview questions for an accounting specialist or accounting position. I'll send those to Maureen, but if anybody has questions, again, feel free to reach out on interview questions. I would always be welcome being a resource. So it's really important to just have that consistency in the questions. And then I attended a conference one time and they talked about hiring for heart and hustle. And it really just spoke to me and I thought it was incredible because for many positions, hiring for heart and hustle, hiring for someone who's going to have empathy for your members and who someone's going to work hard for your Sacco is really important. So if you're hiring for that teller position, if they don't have experience, but they have passion and they have drive and they are empathetic and they are a great communicator, you can teach or train tellers functions, but you can't train passion. You can't train hustle. So look for those things, those drivers that are just great characteristics in an applicant, recognizing that there are many things in a job that you can train. I'm going to say though that if you're hiring for, a finance manager or an accountant, those are the individuals, again, that you'll tie back to that competency that do need to have certain levels of competency. So you want to find heart and hustle in them, but they also have to have those competency levels as well. Some of those things aren't necessarily on the job training. There's expectations on qualifications for those. Maureen, I'm going to have you go to offers and compensation. So the last piece, so now say we've interviewed 5 candidates, we have our top candidate. This would be the point at which you would call their references. You may want to call references on your top 3 candidates. References may have an impact on which applicant you want to hire. There are individuals that tend to interview exceptionally well. And then when you hire them, you're sitting there with a new hire and you're wondering where that awesome person was that you interviewed. That's where references are really important to be able to call references. So I would call references on your top candidates and then make that formal decision. And then do a formal offer letter. So at every position in your organization, it's really important to do a formal offer letter. In that offer letter, you're going to have their wage, their start date, who their supervisor is, what benefits your Sacco might offer. All of those items are detailed out in your offer letter. And a big critical component of them accepting that offer letter is making sure that you have competitive compensation. I'm going to go into much more detail on compensation on retention side, but just know that competitive compensation is super important on both recruiting and retention. So Maureen, I'm going to have you move to the next slide. So we're going to transition to retention now. And for us as leaders, as managers, as board of directors, all of us that are on this call, I just love this quote that the growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership. So again, retention is all about that growth and that development of your staff. So as we flip to that next slide, I have the same breakdown on retention efforts that I think is super critical to retention, but also organizational culture. So organizational culture, again, is what I was talking about, really being my passion, but retention is a huge piece of that. And so we're going to jump into that transparency within a Sacco slide. Okay. So I start with this slide because I think it's really important that if you are going to create good organizational culture, you have to have that open door policy, that open dialogue, and that transparency at an organization. And so I share this iceberg of ignorance because I think it's extremely important when we start taking our, that strategy, that initiative towards retention, that we recognize that transparency is really important, and transparency is critical for Sacco growth, right? So it's not just because it's the right thing to do. All of these efforts just really, like Lois said, there's many things that have a social side, there's many things that have a business side, and as a Sacco, our business decisions balance between those two. As a recruiting and retention, as an HR initiative, it's always a balance. It is always a balance between organizational growth and protection of the organization from an HR standpoint, but also HR as advocates for the employees. So it's that same business versus social balance, but you're going to have that organization and you're going to have that employee. So for us, it's really important to be super transparent in that. And I'm sure many of you are reading these numbers. I remember the first time I read these numbers and introduced this to my executive management team, my CEO and our CFO and chief experience officer, I caveated and I was like, I'm sure you know more than 4%. But if you look at it and you have that open dialogue, the idea is that your frontline staff sees 100% of the problems at your organization. They're the ones who are talking to your members. They are the ones in the day-to-day activities of the organization. And so they're going to know collectively, frontline staff are going to know all of the problems at your organization. Team leaders, supervisors are going to know about 74% of that, of the problems. Managers are going to know 4%, and executives know about, or 9%, sorry, managers, and executives know about 4%. So if you think about how we as organizations make decisions from a strategy standpoint, our executive management team or our management team, so that 9 and 4%, are implementing initiatives for this credit union's growth, only knowing about 9 or 4% of the issues. This is critical when I talk about strategy coming up, but that is why it's so important to have these open door policies and have that organizational culture where people will talk, because it's much, when you're making decisions moving forward on strategy and on solving, implementing projects maybe to solve an issue, if you are talking to your frontline staff about those issues and say, here's a potential project or here's a potential solution to this issue that you brought forward to us, do you think that that would work for us? Now you've become a culture at which you have that open dialogue. You've become a culture that says, not only do I respect you as an employee, I'm actually asking for your feedback on this, because you're going to bring a different perspective to a situation than I am. I'm absolutely going to bring a different perspective to a solution around serving our members than our frontline staff is. So I share this because I think it's really, really important as we go forward organizationally, but also from an HR standpoint, that we think about this iceberg of ignorance and we really engage our frontline staff, we engage our loan officers, we engage everybody at the organization for solutions, because that's when you're going to have really good solutions that actually address the problems, because those individuals are the ones that encounter them day to day. So I'm going to have, Marina, I'm going to have you go to that next slide. The next piece that's really critical for retention is professional development. And I have a couple of different pieces on here on professional development. And I'm going to start with onboarding because we've talked from recruiting in. So what does it look like to train a new hire? And the reason this is such a huge initiative for us at Simplicity and many HR departments that I interact with is that the onboarding program makes or breaks whether or not an employee is going to stay at your organization. Many employees make up their minds on whether or not they're going to stay within the first 30 to 60 days. So if you are very intentional in your onboarding program, making them feel welcome, talking through your core values, doing all of our new hires go through credit union philosophy training and learn about operating principles. All of those things are very intentional because we want all of our new hires to understand, what does it mean to be a credit union? What is the credit union difference? And why is it so awesome to work for a credit union that's sole mission is, you know, the empowerment of our members, right? So improving our members' lives. Many people want to work for organizations that they feel good about what they're doing. And so for us as Saccos or as credit unions, we have to just be very intentional in that in our onboarding program. The next piece that I'm going to talk about is the employee development, and that's not just career development paths, but it's also growth within current positions. So many times when people have conversations about career development, it's, if I start as a teller, what's the next step for me? Many times it's opening up new memberships. The next thing might be somewhere in the lending world, right? So it is important to have those career development paths, but it's also really critical to have growth within current positions. I use the example of my HR and training team all the time. So I am not leaving my HR, my VP position anytime soon. I love what I do, and I'm here for quite a few years yet, before many years before I retire. So what does career development look like for my team? Because if I don't leave my position, that natural flow to the next position of my HR business partner to my position, if I'm not leaving, how do I continue to grow her within her role and in her position? So thinking about growth and development or employee development, it doesn't always have to be a change in jobs, but it does be, you can look at an opportunity for more responsibility, more lead on project instead of assist on projects. So think about growth within current positions as part of your employee development program. The other really important piece is investment in conferences and trainings, such webinars like this that Accosca puts on. Accosca's ADE program that Fubani mentioned earlier, sending staff and being part of, you know, Sacco Congress, or if there's, I know that there's regional meetings. So all of those types of meetings, trainings, conferences, networking sessions, those are all part of professional development for employees and all very critical. And the last part is soft skill training. So I think that this is a component that gets missed often. And I will tell you that this is an area that we ramped up and really started developing in the last 3 months with COVID. So I have stop apologizing, active listening, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, communication, empathy. So one of our organizational trainers has been doing a weekly soft skill challenge that just gives us a little example and allows us to work on that one small skill every week to continue to develop professionally. That's something that helps every individual at the organization, CEO down, you know, teller up, everyone can always continue to develop their soft skills. Again, almost all of these, you know, you can research out there on onboarding programs. You can research career development paths. You know, work with your Apex bodies, work with Accosca on different conferences and trainings that will bring value to your employees. And soft skill training, again, you can research, you know, active listening, mindfulness, emotional intelligence. You can research soft skills, and you can really put together training based on your research with very little cost, with a huge reward. So a lot of these things are things that I'm sharing because they're things that you can implement today at your Sacco. So the next one, Maureen, I'm going to have you go to employee engagement. Under employee engagement, I'm just touching on this. This is something that we have been doing, but again, increased substantially over the last 3 months with COVID-19. But we've always done annual engagement surveys as well as stay views, which are instead of always doing exit interviews when people leave, we've been interviewing people why they stay, what they love about the organization, and opportunities for improvement. And then we put solutions around those. And also pulse surveys. So pulse surveys are just a quick, how are you feeling from an employee standpoint? And employee engagement is just really critical when it comes to employee satisfaction. This is really small, but these are our COVID questions. And it's simple questions like, do you feel like we as a credit union, do you feel like we've taken appropriate steps to keep you safe? Have we communicated enough with you on all of the things that we've done over the last couple of months? You know, so these are surveys that you can create. We have them in our system, in our HR system, but you can use a free service like SurveyMonkey, and it's anonymous. And so your employees feel safe to respond, but then you're keeping a pulse on how your employees are feeling. So that those initiatives, the employee engagement, employee development, professional development, training, again, these are all things that when I talked about proactively recruiting from other financial institutions, if you put in place these particular initiatives, you're going to develop more loyal members. So I know that Angela talked about providing exceptional service and sales and service and how that develops more loyal members, external members for your organization. Think of employee engagement, think of professional development, think of that transparency and open communication, all as business initiatives to keep your staff loyal to your organization, because not all organizations approach this way. And as I said, I know that I have employees that are actively recruited, but I also know that I'm taking the appropriate steps, that they realize that this organization cares about them, this organization appreciates them, this organization listens to them, and they're not interested in leaving Simplicity. So think about that as the business case, right? Employee engagement, how are you feeling, is that social side. It's paying attention to the mental state and emotional state of your employees, but there's a business reason to it, because I don't want to lose my good employees. So keep that balance, or keep those initiatives in mind, not just because at the end of the day, taking care of your employees is the right thing to do, but because it's the right thing for your organization and the best thing for your members, because you're keeping top talent and your top talent is able to serve your members. The next one is compensation. So we're going to go to compensation. And I know that we talked about this in the recruiting standpoint as well. But this again has a huge connection to retention on your employees. So fairly paid employees will be much less likely to offer, entertain an offer from another financial institution. I have had employees that have received offers from other financial institutions. I've had employees who have received offers slightly higher than what they've made here, but because of our benefits, because of our organizational culture, they've stayed. And in some circumstances, if I can do research and show that their wage is not competitive in our market, then in some circumstances, I will do a compensation adjustment because I don't want to lose that employee. So keep that in mind, that those are all strategic approaches to retention. And so really, again, I talked about this in the beginning, that Sacco should be an employer of choice. We have incredible principles and values. And so if we're taking the right approach on compensation, Sacco should not be a training ground for other financials, for banks, larger Saccos to just recruit out well-trained staff. So these are all initiatives to help build that loyalty with your staff, so that even when those offers are are brought forward, they don't entertain them. And I think it's really important to have clear and transparent practices also. So do you have a compensation philosophy? When someone comes to your organization, do you have an established salary grade? So each position at our organization has an established grade based on those essential functions and those competencies. And I can speak to every new hire that based on 11 salary surveys, this is what the position pays, here's the midpoint. We have top performers. Our intention is to be more aggressive to get employees to midpoint, because to me, that's part of that retention initiative. But best practice for us in the US is anywhere from 4 to 7 years to get to midpoint of a grade. So that's, that 50% of a total salary. I take the initiative that if they're a high performer, I want them there in 3 years. There's no reason to wait 4, 5, 6 years to get a high performer to midpoint. So it's all very strategic in how we approach compensation. I could do an entire webinar on this. If anybody wants to see compensation philosophies, understand grades more, have conversations about that, reach out to Maureen and Accosca or your Apex bodies, and we can have further conversations. But in the interest of time, I want to make sure that I don't talk for another 30 minutes on compensation, because I absolutely can. So just being very intentional and transparent on it is super important. And the last piece I said, when we talk about that transparency and that iceberg of ignorance and the strategic plan, it's also really important that your staff feels engaged and your staff feels like they're part of moving their Sacco forward, growing their Sacco. So when you and your board of directors, or when executive management, board of directors set that strategic plan, is that strategic plan communicated all the way out to every staff at your organization? Are they setting annual goals towards those strategic initiatives? So membership growth is probably a strategic goal of every Sacco. Are your frontline staff setting annual goals on how they're going to contribute to membership growth? If loan growth is part of your strategic plan, which it should be, is your frontline staff setting goals around referrals to your loan officers to help increase your loan volume? Loan growth is not solely on your lending department. Is your marketing team setting goals around marketing your loan products to grow your loan portfolio, right? So strategic initiatives need to be a goal of everybody at the organization, but this also ties right back to that transparency and that communication and that understanding that it does not matter what position you're in this organization. We value you as an employee, we value your vision, we value your ideas, and we encourage you to bring those forward through your goals. That really creates an innovative environment and an environment where people can share really cool ideas. We've had a number of really fantastic projects that have been implemented by ideas brought forth by our frontline staff based on conversations with our members. And really, if everybody is working together towards your strategic goals from all positions in the organization, you're working as a cohesive unit, which only then strengthens your organizational culture and that bond between all of your employees. And that trust and transparency is critical to help you achieve goals. Another piece of that, and I have under there working cohesive, if you have open dialogue and you have an innovative culture that encourages ideas, remember, sometimes ideas are not always going to succeed, but as an organization, really take that stance on failing forward, right? Just because someone's idea may not be as successful as it initially was, maybe it just needs to be modified and tweaked. But as an organization, if you have open dialogue and you have that stance of failing forward, you're going to grow together much stronger organizationally. The last page is the tough conversations. So I didn't have that in the 5 bullet points, but these are critical conversations to have, whether it's a member of the management having them, or if you have an HR department having them. It's super important, because if you don't have performance management, you don't have accountability, and Saccos across the world do this. If we know an employee is not performing, we tend to really try to coach them and coach them and coach them, and to the point sometimes that either negative person, that underperformer, starts having a negative effect on your top performers. It starts costing your organization money, because your top performers will get demotivated if they continue to see underperformers or underachieving colleagues continue with the organization, and they don't have growth opportunities. So these are very difficult conversations. Again, probably a whole nother webinar, honestly, but they're super critical to retention of your staff, because if you have underperformers continuing to bring negativity to your organization, it's going to start costing your Sacco money. It's going to start costing efficiencies and productivity of your top performers. I have performance management and accountability in here because I talked about core values, expectations, essential functions from the beginning in the job description all the way through, and this is where it carries all the way through. So you can't talk about core values when you hire a new employee, but if someone is not doing something with integrity, and integrity is one of your core values, you need to be having accountability conversations with them on integrity, because it's critical to retention of your organization and your organizational culture. And so that's just really, these are important but difficult conversations. And then really the last slide on retention is what does this all mean? So how does this all correlate to the growth of your Sacco, right? Because ultimately that's what we're here for. We hire employees. Yes, we want to take care of our employees. Great employees make that happen. Great employees make your Sacco grow. So Sacco strengths, so take care of your employees and they will provide exceptional service for your members. Again, we talk about what does empathy mean? How can you develop empathy through those soft skills? You know, especially in the last 3 months as employees, as members of the community, our members, there's been a lot of struggles and there's been a lot of challenges and job loss and stress with isolation. And if you have staff that are exceptional staff and they have empathy, they are going to be there for your members and really help develop those and deepen those relationships with your members, which only strengthens your Sacco. Likewise, strong employees also build each other up. As I said, you know, you have top performers, they're going to continue to achieve and bring that innovation that continues to move your Sacco forward and help grow your Sacco. Like I said, investment in knowledge and training encourages growth and innovation. So whether it's going to a conference, whether it's meeting a really incredible colleague from another country in Africa at Sacco Congress, you know, that's where that networking continues to just really bring innovation and new ideas to your Sacco. So investment in that knowledge and investment in training is really just ultimately investment in the growth of your staff, and again, the growth of your Sacco. Turnover in Saccos cost a lot of money. We don't necessarily think about it, but this is that strong business case. Whether it's the amount of money you spend in recruiting, the amount of money you spend in time for your managers to be doing interviews, reviewing resumes, or your HR staff, recruiting and recruiting new staff on, the cost that it takes to train on a new hire, and the revenue lost by having a position down, all can cost a Sacco a substantial amount of money, anywhere between 50 to 200% of that position's annual salary. Typically, the 50% is on your more entry-level positions. So if you lost a teller, you're looking at about 50% of their annual salary and an investment in retraining, recruiting, and lost revenue. If you're talking high-level positions, if you're talking finance managers, that member services manager, CEOs are going to be really high. You know, we're talking, it's going to cost you almost 200% of their annual salary just to get someone in and up to speed. That's not, that's not even including the salary now that you have to hire, you're bringing that replacement in. So those figures, when you start talking about the business case, when you start talking to a CEO, why my retention efforts are super critical, why this soft skills challenge is extremely beneficial to our organization, you start talking the numbers of, if we lose people, this is what it's going to cost us. That's a bottom line figure, and that is 100% that organizational protection. And again, like I said, investment in recruitment, retention, and training initiatives will have a direct impact on success and growth. All about this, we talked very much about that on the taking care of your employees. Your top employees, your rock star employees, your top performers are going to help your Sacco grow and succeed. And they're also going to help your members grow and succeed, which is that full circle, right? Your Sacco succeeds, your members succeed. It's all interrelated. It's all one big circle and chain. And like I said, investment in training should be an intentional investment. So don't just do it because you think it's a thing you should do. It should be very intentional. What is the issue or the solution you're trying to solve? And what's the training that you're going to implement to solve it? So it doesn't have to just be because it feels like a right thing. It still needs to be very intentional. And like I said, a lot of these things there's resources out there. There's a ton of books out there on emotional intelligence and mindfulness, on soft skills. So maybe the purchase of one book for $13, you can develop an entire soft skill program. So it's a very intentional development that may not have a huge cost to the Sacco, like expense cost, but it's going to have an incredible return on investment. So that's really why it's so important to invest in your employees, invest in bringing exceptional employees on, because that's exactly what recruitment is bringing on exceptional employees. And then just the last slide is just really at the end of the day, our why. So many of you have attended all of these sessions, and our why is our members, right? At the end of the day, like I said, Sacco liquidity, you know, why is it important for Sacco liquidity? One, it's the stability of our members' money. And two, Sacco liquidity allows us to provide products and services to our members that they need and that will help them continue to improve their social and economic status, right? And Lois talked in great detail about that. Again, financial counseling, that can be an entire development program. So as Mark said, that financial counseling is a certification program. So what does it look like to train your staff to be certified financial counselors? That's professional development for your staff. And it has a huge reward for your members, right? Everything we do is centered around our members. That member experience, that sales and service, again, that Angela talked about, that's critical to providing that member experience and that exceptional experience. And that's what's going to make your members loyal. That's what's going to make them come to you when they need you the most. And if you have exceptional staff, if you have that Sacco Dream Team, you can help provide that member experience. You can help provide that financial counseling, and you strengthen your Sacco and build that liquidity so that you can develop and help your members. So all of these tie together around our members and strengthening and improving our members' lives. And that's why we're here. That's what we do as Saccos. So with that, I'm sorry I talked a little bit longer than I thought. I get a little excited about this stuff, but I want to open it up to questions to anything that might be said.
Okay, thank you so much, Katy. This has been a very, very enlightening presentation. I know a number of issues have come out that people might want to comment. But before they come and comment, I just wanted to emphasize on the point of the importance of having a recruitment strategy. That is very, very important. We need to thank you also that you share a sample. I know that people can also learn from that. It is very important to look at recruitment from the time we're getting somebody into the organization. And then the importance of investing in training our employees, having a direct impact on performance. That's why sometimes when you see a steadily growing Sacco, you also see a highly committed staff, or you also see a very good recruitment strategy behind it. And if you also see a very high performance culture in an organization or in a Sacco, you see a very, very good recruitment strategy that has been implemented, and possibly another good retention strategy. I know people might want to ask so many questions, especially on the composition. This has been a key issue in most of Saccos. People complaining that cooperative Saccos do not pay very, very well, and then they become training grounds for other financial institutions. That is very, very key, and let's open it up for discussions. Maureen, we need to get to the polls. Right. So the first poll, let me just read through the poll. Number one, we're saying during recruitment, the hiring team should mainly focus on what? Is it competency? Should they focus on qualification? Should they focus on attitude? Or should they focus on experience? Please choose one and send your answer so that we can look at what should be the main focus when we are recruiting. So that's the first poll. Thank you so much. So we see that this is how we have responded. Competency, 39%, qualification, 6%, and attitude, 42%, and experience, 12%. I know at the end, Katy, you need to make a comment on the same. But it looks like people believe that we need to be looking at the attitude when we are recruiting. Somebody with very good attitude will be trained possibly. Let's get to the second poll. The second, we are saying, how best would you describe your recruitment process? It was easy to apply. Information was readily available. I was happy with the time between application and response. It was a headhunt, didn't go through recruitment process. Choose one, and then we see how we stand regarding the recruitment process. Right. Let's see. 19% of us are saying, well, it was very easy to apply. Another 19% saying information was readily available. I was happy with the time between application and the response, at 8%. It was a headhunt, didn't go through recruitment process, 25%. Katy, you need to make a comment on that as well.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot higher than I was thinking, but I think if you know that 25% of staff is brought on from headhunting, that's where then those retention efforts to me are critical, because that's how you prevent headhunting from occurring with your staff.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to the third poll. Maureen, that's we have the third poll before.
Okay, Fumbani, I guess we'll go straight to the questions. Questions from participants.
Okay, fine.
And this, I will share this with Katy. Please take this up. This is the first question, and it's from Elaine Manga. Elaine asks, as a CEO, how can you identify the potentials of your employee during a recruitment process?
Ooh. Good question, Elaine. That's a great question. So I think that's where that variety, so when I reference the variety in questions that you ask, that's where when you have a number of different questions, you can see how they answer and see how they handle specific situations. So say we're hiring from an accounting position, right? You're specifically wanting accuracy. You're wanting someone who can, handle multiple things going on at once. They may have to have member contact, but the vast majority of their communication is going to be with coworkers, right? So to me, I would ask questions along the lines of, talk to me about a situation where you and a coworker didn't agree on an approach. How did you come to a resolution, and how did that interaction go? Right. So then you're gonna see how they interact with coworkers. You're gonna see how they can talk through a difficult situation. You're also gonna get an idea of how they handle approaches on project management, because part of the way that they'll explain it is, here's how we decided to move forward with it. You can always follow up with was that your suggestion or approach? The other piece is those behavioral questions. So, how do you handle a stressful situation? How do you decompress after a stressful situation? And things that you want to listen for are so say I said, how do you handle a stressful situation? And someone says, oh, I just go out and go for a run, or, I work out, or I do boxing, right? So then how they handle a stressful situation is an external. They don't handle it through a positive mindset, right? So I think about how I'm going to handle it. I'm going to approach it calmly. I know that it's just a bad day, and I'm going to move forward. So listening for some of those behavioral mindsets and having those different types of questions gives you very specific ideas of what you're looking for. So to me, that's where those variety of questions in an interview are really, really important. There's books out there literally that say how to ask high impact interview questions. And you can say, I'm looking for this characteristic, and it's like a page of different questions. So there's a lot of resources out there, but that's where we specifically have different types of questions in the interview process to address that. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Now, Katy, how do you blend the ability to pay issues, let's say in the credit unions, they want to be spending this and that. How do you blend the ability to pay issues in the Sacco with the desire to recruit and retain talented staff?
I'm sorry, Fubani, I missed. So how do you handle the issues on recruiting and retention? With what?
How do you want to blend the issue of budgeting, because people want to spend a lot maybe on operations, than maybe looking at how best they want to retain staff, how best to recruit the best on the market, something like that.
Yep, good question. Okay, so when it comes to compensation and recruiting, we do our salary budget as part of our entire operational budget. So we submit organizationally a salary budget to our CFO or your finance manager, whomever does your budget. I work with every manager at the organization. So I have meetings prior to budget time on managers on merit and wage increases on all of their existing staff. And we talk through if there's any potential staff that we want to add for the coming year. So then prior to putting my budget together, I go out and I research that compensation level for that, and I add that to my budget. So I have a total salary budget for the entire year, and then I'm responsible for making sure that we're within salary budget. With that said, I also add a cushion in there for recruiting negotiations, or if someone were to leave and we need to do a comp adjustment, I have an additional chunk of money that I build into my budget to accommodate for that. Many times, if someone leaves and we're not paying a salary, that adds a little bit more to my cushion per se for negotiations. But that's where that compensation philosophy is really important. So I have those salary grades established for every single position. And if someone comes to us and says, I want this much money, I have a job offer and I need this much to stay, then the conversation is, one, organizationally, does it make sense to do that increase? Are they a top performer? If they're a top performer, then we're going to continue down the conversation. Where are they in their salary grade? I don't ever push anybody outside the top of the salary grade. So once they hit that 100% of their or that max of their salary grade, we don't go outside that grade. But then that's where we start having conversations with them about, okay, so you've been in your position this long, you're at the top of your grade. What type of growth opportunities would you like? Where are you interested in growing? We've also developed different tiers. So at our teller level, at our loan officer level, and at our mortgage loan officer level, we have a senior position. So that's where we have top employees move to that senior position based on experience, based on being a leader in their team. So when I talked about that growth within their positions, not necessarily changing a position, that's what I mean by that. So we have those conversations on budget and if it's in salary grade, and at the end of the day, if they're getting offered the same job somewhere else and it's not in our grade, then I reevaluate the grade. But we don't just, like, if someone just says, I need this amount to stay, that's a dangerous game if you start varying away from your comp philosophy. But that's why it's really important to have a comp philosophy and communicate that to your staff so that they know how you calculate compensation. I calculate compensation solely based on numbers. There is no emotional piece behind, I think this job should be paid more. It's all based on essential functions and calculations within the system. So then I can communicate that to staff. And I think that open and transparency compensation philosophy also helps you navigate those conversations with staff when they're wanting to leave. Pavani, do you think, is that what you were asking? Is that what that question was?
The first part has been responded to, where he's looking at turnovers being very, very costly, and especially at the senior level. So he's asking to say, how can we help the credit union managers to reduce turnover, especially at senior level? You don't want to see the head of finance leaving, the head of operations leaving, and you find that they stay 2 or 3 months, they also want to leave. What advice can we give to that effect?
Yeah. So I think the first conversation of that turnover being very costly at that high level is making sure that your compensation is competitive. So again, back to that compensation philosophy, is your compensation competitive? If the answer to that is yes, then what are you doing from a professional development for them? So that's one of those things that gets really hard at the professional level or those higher levels up, what type of professional development is being done for them? Are they able to go to conferences? Are they able to attend different webinars? Are they able to go to situations where they can network with their colleagues? So do they feel like there's an investment in them professionally continuing to grow? And I think that, so those are the two, to me, those would be like number one and number two, ensuring that comp is in fact competitive for your market. And what does your market look like? You know, if you are surrounded by banks, and banks typically pay higher, you know, those are your competitors. So you may need to adjust compensation, their wage compensation up a little bit, in order to be a competitive wage. And then also, what are you doing for them professionally to get to continue to develop? Those would be my top two. If I had to add a top three, I would encourage them and have them spearhead maybe projects or strategic initiatives that they normally don't get to do. So that would be growth into other areas that somewhere else may not offer. But then that would be, that would be again a different type of professional development, but an encouragement of maybe leading a project or leading an implementation of something that the Sacco is developing. That's a great question.
Kate, this is from Venge Tembo, Zimbabwe, and he asks, we have seen institutions hiding the identity on job advertisements in newspapers, especially for senior positions. What's your take or advice on this strategy?
So hiring with news, just so I clarify, hiring with newspapers for top positions?
Yes, but they hide the identity of the institution.
Oh, I don't do that. I know that I see it on searches on keeping institutions confidential. I choose not to do that for a number of different reasons. My number one reason is that we've worked really hard to develop the culture and the organizational culture, and develop our credit union as an employer of choice to work at. So people like community-wide know, hey, Simplicity is a great place to work. So if I hide Simplicity as a brand, then I'm hiding our employee brand from being able to promote that we're a great place to work. I think it's a strategy that some do. Honestly, I don't, unless they don't want other organizations to know that they don't have that position filled. I personally think that Saccos should celebrate all of the great things that we do for our membership, and that to me is a recruitment tool to show that you get to work for an exceptional organization that gives back to its members. And if you hide yourself, then you're not using that to your advantage in recruiting.
All right. Question. Of course, I know the other question from Farai was contributing on the rewards for employees. Farai from Zimbabwe, saying rewards you give to your employees should speak to their emotional needs and should go beyond their monetary compensation. Because, for example, in this COVID time, or where you have hyper-inflationary environment, how do you want to keep up, keep the pace and be able to reward employees very well in monetary terms? So that is a comment from Farai, which is very, very correct. Mm-hmm. I want to look at that as the last question that we're having, unless we have any other question coming up, Maureen, or else.
Okay, one last burning one. This is from Angela Nyanjong from Kenya, and she asks, One can identify an employee who has the required qualifications and performs well in an interview, but upon recruitment has critical gaps in their performance on the job. How do you address this gap during the recruitment process?
So you notice performance gaps in the recruitment process or after hire, like right after hire? So
right after hire.
Yeah.
So they were
okay.
very good at the interview process, but when
Could
it
be.
comes to performance, it's not matching. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, you have really good interviewers, and even all the behavioral questions in the world and the different questions, sometimes they are great interviewers and then they get in the office and they don't perform. So that's where I was talking about that performance management and that accountability conversation. So when we're doing onboarding with a new hire, we talk about we have service standard expectations. We go through our core values expectations. We go through, all of those expectations and training. There have been a handful of times, maybe one or two that I can think of, that in training, our trainers have said, I'm concerned about this employee for this reason. I feel like there may be a challenge. We get a pretty good feel coming out of training, working with them, when we work with them, that there may be some challenges. We constantly have conversations with their manager when the training team is hiring or training them on. And we let that manager know. We have a scheduled standing meeting. HR training has a standing meeting with managers at 90 days. And we ask the manager, how are they doing on performance? Are they performing where they need to be? I mean, they're not going to be proficient by any means at 90 days, but are they where they need to be? Are there any concerns on attitude, on living our core values? And if in this question, if they are not performing, then at 90 days, we have a conversation with them about, here, you're not performing to our expectations. Here's what we're going to do to provide you the additional training for you to succeed, right? So that we take some of that accountability. Maybe it's something in training or the way they were trained, and say, we're going to touch base in another 30 days. If it hasn't improved following this training, then it may be a conversation where we separate ways and we terminate the employee. But that's where it's super critical to have those, like I said, those performance expectations, those expectations on service standards, living our core values from the point of interview on, because then if you have to terminate an employee early into their employment, you can say, we've been talking about these expectations from before it was in the job description. We talk about it in the interview process. We talk about it in onboarding. We talked about it at their 90 days. They weren't meeting expectations. We gave them additional training. They were still unable to do the job. Therefore, they are no longer employed here. So that's where you have to just be very diligent in having those conversations and documenting all of that along the process. But great question. But if it's early on and you have a feeling that this employee is not going to work out, and you've invested some money in training and you've tried other types of training methods and it's still not working, stop, because now you're just spending money on an employee that's just not going to work out. At a certain point, you just have to realize, and you almost always do, you almost always know, but then you just want to invest a little bit more. You almost always know that they're not going to work out. So then at that point, that's where you start having the conversations to end employment and not continue to invest more and more time and more money and more resources of the Sacco. Any other questions come in?
Okay, I think okay, I see the very last question got to do with the soft skill training coming from Yet Nayet. They're saying, could you explain more about the soft skill training? I know this is what we lack, most of us. We could be very, very good technicians, very, very good managers sometimes, but lack soft skills. This is key. Yes, so can you explain a bit more? And then after that, we can close it on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So soft skill training is focusing on one particular soft skill. So active listening, I'll use that one as an example. What are you doing when you're talking to someone? And it's just being very diligent and thinking about it. So what we do is we focus on one small skill a week, and we do a soft skill challenge. So the challenge on active listening is an example of active listening, and then when you interact with someone. So it's when I have a meeting with someone, I am then practicing my active listening. So instead of, and what that means is, say I'm having a conversation with someone. Active listening is actually listening to what they're saying without formulating my response or my idea until they're completely done explaining it. Many times it's followed by a quick paraphrase. So say Fubani was telling me about the recruitment process and utilizing newspapers. So I would listen to Fubani and I would say, so what I hear you're saying is, you know, about 40% of individuals use newspapers to promote their jobs in Malawi. And then I would say, I think, you know, with technology expanding, if newspapers are still working, that right now we continue utilizing newspapers, but my suggestion would be, let's start developing online posting and our ability to handle applications online, so that as it's embraced more and more from a technology standpoint, we're already in a position to do that rather than scramble to get caught up with the times, right? So active listening is that art of listening and not formulating a response prior to responding, and utilizing like paraphrasing. I'm going to write a note down. I have an example of two different soft skills. I mentioned the stop apologizing. We all have been doing it, right? As we're doing webinars and we're accidentally muted and we start talking, like you see my mouth moving, but you don't hear me. I unmute myself and I say, I'm sorry, I was still muted. Really, you should save your sorries for when you actually did something that you should be sorry for. What you can say is, I was still muted, let me repeat myself, right? It doesn't necessarily require me to say, I am sorry, let me repeat myself. It's, I was muted. So it saves your I apologize for times where it's really important for you to apologize. So I will send out the stop apologizing one and the active listening one to Maureen to distribute, and you can see what those look like. And then many of those can just be a couple of short paragraphs of here's a soft skill and here's how you can practice it for, you know, this week. And then you continue to develop that, and then you start using it more and more, because the more you do something, the more comfortable it becomes. Good question.
Thank you so much, Katy, for the presentation. I'm sure you have exceeded everybody's expectation on this one. And let me just say that we had 75 attendees, and I hope maybe because of time, we may not have seen all the questions, and I know people may still have the questions. Please forward them to Accosca email that we provided, and we should be able to send them to you, Katy, and then we can respond to various other questions that would be coming. Let me thank you so much, Katy, for this presentation, and to all the participants, the attendees, I say thank you so much. This has been a very valuable discussion, because this is what we need in our meetings. We need staff that can deliver our strategic plans. In most cases, we come up with very good strategic plans, but we have not looked at the people that would deliver such a plan. It is very important after delivering, after coming up with that plan, we step back and look at the human resource that we have. Where we want to recruit, make sure we come up with a very recruitment strategy so that we can capture those people that can deliver our plans. Sure, we don't need to be training grounds for other financial institutions. Retention is key. Let's invest a lot in training our people. Let's invest a lot in the recruitment of our people. Thank you so much for your attention. And I know you also raised the very, very last slide where you looked at the performance management, accountability, and termination. Time permitting, this would be another presentation because I know performance management is another important area and termination also very, very key. We shouldn't be investing in those people that they are very, very untrainable. By the end of the day, we need to get to the very last page of termination. That could be another webinar, time permitting. Thank you, Accosca, for this. And watch out to another presentation, which is on 26th June. Watch out for our next webinar, building synergies to promote inclusivity in cooperatives, by Benoit Andre, who is the CDF director in Canada. I also invite everybody to come and listen to this important presentation. Once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Accosca. Thank you, Katy. Thank you, all our participants. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.